Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Andrew Connors. I'm a managing director here at Fairport Wealth and oversee our business owners practice group. And this is our Business Owners Unfiltered speaker series. And so today we are lucky enough to have three, I think, pretty amazing individuals: Cheryl Strom, David Work, Dan Natowski. Just a quick bio. I could give a long bio on each of them. Cheryl is a partner at Riverside. I think you've been involved in $3 billion of M&A transactions. You have been a fly in the wall in terms of what works and doesn't work in terms of business and growth and success. David has 20 plus years of experience. He's a colleague. He heads up our financial and estate planning. He is I would call it a top of the pyramid pinnacle thought leader. He's the person we go to for business owner situations when there's a high level of complexity involved. And Dan Natowski, you've been director of development, president, and CEO of a number of businesses. You head a Vistage chair here in town, or you're chair of a Vistage group here in town, and chair of the newly formed Tiger 21 Club here in town, which I think is a really, really interesting organization. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would describe it as a peer group for high net worth families that addresses all the issues that high net worth families and often business owners face. So we're going to get started. I wanted to share a statistic here real quick. 88% of high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals are business owners. And so I find that statistic very interesting. We work with a lot of business owners. Most of you in this room are business owners. And the journey of being a business owner is fraught with a lot of peaks and valleys and unforeseen curves in the road. The three areas that we see business owners when we think of, wow, this family, they've done it right. They're the poster child or the poster family of what you want to achieve. And those are families that have dealt with struggles in terms of growing their business, growing their personal wealth, and along that journey, what the priorities are often change, and how do you maintain harmony and have wealth be something that positively impacts your family. And so these three individuals, who I obviously think highly of, are going to share their insights around those different topics today. And the final thing I want to say is this will be very disappointing if the four of us are up here talking and there's not one person that interrupts us to ask a question. So if there's a thought you have, raise your hand, shout it out. I would love for this to be an interactive discussion, because if it's starting to percolate in your mind, I guarantee you there's 3 or 4 other people that are thinking the same thing. And that is, I think, how great conversations and insights get shared. So we're going to jump into things. Where I wanted to start things off is when we think about the business owner journey is, how do I grow my business? How do I scale my business? And so scaling and growing your business obviously leads to growing and scaling your personal wealth. But Cheryl, having kind of been on the front lines of seeing a lot of businesses grown and scale, I'd love to hear your perspective on that topic. What do you guys look for at Riverside in terms of qualities that lend themselves towards scaling a business?
Thanks so much, Andrew. So, yes, that's a question I'm asked quite a bit is, how do we identify companies that we invest in? Because just to take a step back, so I work for the Riverside Company. We're a private equity firm. And for 36 years of our history, what we do all day long is try to find privately held, individually held, very often founder-owned, small and medium-sized businesses where the owners will allow us to invest in the company. It might be buying 100% of the company if their goal is that I'm 80 years old and it's time for me to retire, or it might be I'm 45 or 50 years old, but I want help getting this company from, say, I got it off the ground to 20 million in revenue, and now I think this could be, I met yesterday morning with someone who said, I think my company could be 500 million in revenue. How do I get there? I've gotten it this far. And that is why, the private equity industry largely exists. What we do at Riverside, we have about $14 billion in assets under management. But what we've done that's different than the rest of the industry is we've remained focused on small and medium-sized businesses. So my role is often, and I've been at Riverside for 18 years, but is having very often that first conversation with a founder or family member or one of 4 shareholders of a company that's just thinking about, should we keep going the way we're going right now, or should we make a change, which involves bringing in a new shareholder that is going to help us grow. So, and we, the reality is we don't like to publish these statistics too much, but we look at about 4,000 businesses a year globally, and we invest in about 70. So there are a lot of businesses that we're saying no to along the way. So I think, Andrew, the spirit of this question is, well, what makes you say yes? You know what I mean?
What's the quality? What makes those 70 unique that you say this is where we want to put money to work?
Yeah, and so what we're looking for is ideally a company that already has a great management team and a set of people who are running the business with a growth mentality that want to grow even further and kind of believe, hey, I'm ready to make some changes here because in order to get to the next level, we're going to need to do some things perhaps with some resources that we don't have in-house. I'll kind of run through the criteria we have for investing in companies, and one reaction to it is, well, if my company had all those criteria, why would I sell it? Why wouldn't I just own 100% of it and keep going? And there are a lot of reasons for that. Risk diversification and just having access to additional capital to make some interesting moves, and I'll go over what some of those look like. But our criteria, beyond the financial criteria, we on the financial criteria side, we typically need about a 5 to 7 year operating history, sometimes longer. We're typically looking for companies that we're different than a venture firm. And one quick misconception, sometimes people say private equity, venture capital, you're the same, right? Well, we're actually incredibly different disciplines in the financial industry. Venture capital firms are awesome. They're taking risk with companies very often before they've even generated revenue or before they've proven their revenue model. Kind of, here's $50 million to spend. You've got $2 million in revenue. Have at it, and we're going to spend all this on growth. What we're doing is actually saying, here's a company that has, just roughly speaking, 20 million, 30 million in revenue, some nice operating profit, a good management team, and the owners are ready to say, hey, I'm ready to sell 80% of this to someone else, stay in the game myself, but kind of position this company for a new frontier, a new future. So what are those criteria? Laundry list includes excellent management, market leadership, non-cyclical, ideally, repetitive sale. In a perfect world, all of our portfolio companies would be subscription-like revenue, as opposed to a bit, the type of companies we stay away from would be a company making capital equipment, and they have 10 million in revenue, but it's composed of 10 $1 million sales. And once the customer buys that $1 million piece of equipment, they're never going to buy it again for 20 years because it has a long, useful life. So those are companies that we're really afraid of because the orders can dry up when the economic cycle turns. Growing end market, lower customer concentrations. It's really tough to invest in a company where, say, the top 2 customers are 80% of revenue. It's really hard to sleep at night. And I think owners of those companies are, if they're thinking about, positioning their employees, their company, their very existence for a strong future, they're trying to diversify that. You can't take a big customer and say, hey, I'm just going to serve you less. So what you have to do instead is gain new customers, to help dilute that concentration while maintaining that important customer.
Isn't it pretty common, though, smaller, middle-sized businesses are always going to have some customer concentration? So where's the line in the sand, so to speak?
Absolutely, great question. So we have a few different funds at Riverside. One is our microcap fund, which invests in younger, earlier stage companies, and we actually have looser criteria because we're like, we know, to get going, you've got to have that one big important customer in your end market. We want to see the largest single customer at ideally not more than 30 or 35%. And the top 5 customers not more than 50%. So that's about where we can kind of tolerate and say, yes, there's risk here. We'd love the top customer to be 3% of revenue and to learn that you have 1,000 customers rather than you've got 60 customers and the top 5 are 75% of revenue. Sometimes that happens in the aerospace industry, in the pharma industry. You can't get around it in consumer retailer. There's just going to be a small number of really big channels to market, but we don't like that one or two people can make a different decision and change the destiny of that company. So, again, as I went through the criteria, and Andrew, your question is, well, what do you have to have? I'd say those are the characteristics that if you own and operate a company today, you want to try to check a critical mass of those boxes. You may not be able to check them all, but those are the kind of things that are going to make an investor interested in your business. And I can tell you that bringing in outside investors has really changed families and their wealth experience, and has changed their lives. There's an example of a company right in Ohio, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, that was willing to sell 80% of their company to us, and it met all those criteria. But they wanted a generational change of leadership. They wanted to prepare the company for retirement. And they also knew that the company was facing some challenges in the future that were hard for them to address by themselves. IT and tech, turning paper industry into software. Those are hard things to do without bringing in outside talent. And I've seen owners of companies be reluctant to make those top executive level hires. It mixes up things, it rocks the boat. Do you give that person ownership? We really believe in management teams having ownership. 10 or 15 people all having shares of equity in the business. That really helps make sure that a company is going to move on an appropriate plan that everyone agrees on. But if it's a little too tight and people don't really feel invested, they might take their talent somewhere else. But back to that family in Ohio, they were able to take a company with around $30 million in revenue, bring in an outside investor to own about 80%, which takes a lot of risk, giving up control. Someone else could make big changes the day after close. We gained their trust. We assured them, we want the same thing you want. We want to see your family be successful. We want to see this management team grow. We're going to augment around it. Fast forward 10 years, that company is now worth over $1 billion in enterprise value. It has gone through its third private equity backer, and that family still owns 20% of the company. They are, as you can imagine, doing a little bit of the math, they are a very happy family. They are very philanthropic. They've established a foundation. They give back to their community, and they look for ways to mentor and support other companies. But we're thrilled that our little role in that was their first outside investor who said, we think you need to change out your IT person. By the way, we need to hire about 10 salespeople. You've been hiring 3 a year, but you can do more, and really invest in technology. So.
Awesome, thanks. Kind of, because you just finished with hiring people, leadership, things along those lines. And so in your role, Dan, you've been leaders of a lot of privately held businesses. You work with a lot of leaders in Vistage and in Tiger 21. I'd love to hear your thoughts and expand on that.
Okay, sure. First, I wanted to just ask the group, who is familiar with Vistage? Anyone familiar with Vistage? It's like a YPO. And anyone familiar with Tiger 21? Okay. So I have a Vistage group. Vistage, just for those who are not familiar, Vistage is a peer group for CEOs, presidents of medium to small to medium-sized businesses, founders who are challenged by how do I grow my business, how do I scale it, how do I deal with the challenges that come with running a business, staffing, supply chain, and even personal issues. They could have a spouse that they're having issues with, or a child that's ill, and that's consuming a lot of their time. So it's all about those things. And I consider Tiger 21 as graduate school for Vistage, because it's now that leader, that CEO who now had a big liquidity event, did all the right things, and sold his business, and now his challenges aren't so much running the business, it's how do I deal with this new wealth that I've achieved. And believe it or not, a lot of challenges come with this wealth. How do I deal with my children, estate planning, how do I give it away? Lots of challenges, so that's where Tiger 21 comes into play. But when I think about my Vistage group, and I'm curious, how many in here are CEOs or presidents or founders of businesses? So there's quite a few in the room. I think one of the issues that, one of the qualities of good business leaders are many. Communication, being empathetic, showing vulnerability, having a growth mindset. But I think one of the most important things as business leaders you have to do is be strategic. And what I mean by that is you have to ask yourself, when you think about your company, am I running my company or am I leading my company? And there's a big difference, because if you're running your company, you're probably bogged down in the day-to-day tactical decisions and tasks that it takes to run your business, versus leading your company where you have a vision of where you want to be, you put the plans in place, you put the structure in place in all departments of your business, so it can run efficiently, and you're not bogged down with the details. So I want to give you one example of a member of my Vistage group who really exemplifies what it means to reach that pinnacle. This member, I won't mention any names or businesses, he tried to sell his business several years before he joined my business group. He put together a deck, he hired an investment banker, put it out to market, and got zero interest. Nothing, not one. No one was interested in buying his business, didn't get any
That's
offers.
never a good sign.
That's not a good sign. So fast forward to, he recently put his, he was very frustrated and upset that he never got an offer, no one seemed interested. Fast forward to just a couple months ago, he went back out to the market, hired another investment banker, put it out for bid, put the deck out. He got 6 offers immediately, and incredible offers for exponentially higher than he thought he would ever get from the business. So what did he do in between? He did a lot. But one of the first things he did was he realized that he was too involved in the day-to-day running of the business. He needed to hire a number 2, a COO type person who could do a lot of the day-to-day stuff. So he went and used a recruiter and hired a COO. Well, it wasn't easy. He had to spend some money doing that, but he could see the vision, what that would mean to his business. Then, and I hope it's because of Vistage and some other things that he learned, he incorporated EOS into his business. And in fact, one of the potential buyers said they don't look at businesses that don't do EOS. So it's critically important. If you're not familiar with EOS, something you should take a look into. So he did those big things, but having the right people in the right seats allows the CEO time to be strategic. Now they can schedule time out of their day to not be involved in just the day-to-day, but think about the long term. What do we need to do to transition this business to the next level? Does that help?
That helps immensely. Great story.
Okay.
I love, as I'm thinking about this, I'll get to you in a minute, Ron. But I love as we're starting to share all these stories and examples, ultimately it kind of comes down to people and mindset in terms of what propels financial, personal, business things forward. Yeah, Ron, you had a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm familiar with EOS, but Dan, please explain what that stands for.
Entrepreneurial Operating System.
So maybe share a little bit more about what EOS is, how it works.
Gene Wickman out of Detroit wrote a book called Traction, right? That describes it. He also there's many books out now. Get a Grip. It's not a software system. It's a system to run your business based on setting priorities. First of all, based on having the right people in the right seat. That's one of the first things you do when you incorporate EOS. Do we have the right people in the right seats? You might have the right person, wrong seat. You might have the wrong person, wrong seat. Probably shouldn't be in the organization. You need to make those tough decisions. Then you set priorities. You have very efficient meetings. It's a way to get things done. It's a systematic approach to running your business.
I'm just curious, show of hands, how many people in here are familiar with EOS and or use EOS in their business? So probably about half. I know at Fairport we run it, and it has been a differentiator in helping us be more strategic, systematic, and identifying challenges, solving them, and moving forward. And I think that's been for any business, is a key to success, is how do you identify and solve problems quickly. So kind of focusing on the personal financial wealth piece, would love to hear your perspective, David, in terms of what you see, in terms of obviously scaling business helps feed the scaling of wealth, which helps feed a lot of other things. But what do you see as the key ingredients to making that happen? And another question I'd like to ask you, and I've just had a number of meetings literally this week with different family business groups where people have kind of questioned, when is the right time to take chips off the table? How do I know when's the right time? And I was in a meeting yesterday, and the husband is saying, if I got an offer of X tomorrow, I'd take it. And the wife is saying, there's no way in hell I'd let you take that. Our kids work in this business. We are keeping this. And so it was a pleasant experience being a part of that discussion.
Don't you all wish you could have been a part of that conversation?
So I'd love to hear your insights.
Yeah, thank you. So I think a theme that we're hearing is people and purpose. And so one of the things that I'm involved with is the planning side of things. And so what I see families doing is they kind of over-rotate to the business side, and they don't focus as much, and they're not as intentional about focusing on the personal wealth side. Okay, so one of the things that I've seen successful families engage in is thinking about their wealth in terms of their legacy. So what are they going to leave behind? What decisions are they going to make today, both on the business side and the personal wealth side, that will impact the future? And so like that can look like, oh, we're going to grow this business, accumulate a lot of wealth, and then leave all that money to the next generation. That's a part of it, but it goes beyond that. And I think Dan mentioned charitable giving. So, legacy can include, giving back and what impact is, am I going to leave? Is our family going to leave? So certainly focusing on both sides of the equation, having that sense of purpose, but then also having the right team in place. What does that look like? On the business side, you can be a part of these groups and you can bring in, private equity folks, but to manage your personal wealth, you've got to think about that separately. So having the right advisor, the right financial advisor in place, the right accountant, the right estate attorney, not your corporate attorney. Attorneys are very focused in certain areas, so having the right team in place, I would say, also supports balancing those two things.
And maybe this is a question all three of you can answer. When do you think, if you're advising, whether it's in Vistage or you sit on different boards, you talk to a lot of business owners, and sometimes they struggle with, when is the right time to sell my business or sell a portion of it? How do you answer that question or give people perspective on that front?
Well, I was just going to say, so I actually had a meeting with a owner of a light bulb business. This thing was almost over 100 years old. So this was a multi-generational family business. And so he said something to me that might sound counterintuitive in terms of when do you take the chips off the table. He said, you've got to do it when things are really going well.
100% agree. That is exactly, and there are some old perceptions from maybe 15, 20 years ago. I think private equity has risen in awareness, that people realize, wow, this actually is a tool that I can tap into, and they're going to help me. But there certainly was a mindset going years back, and I did have a discussion with someone admittedly in a small town, with a business who was trying to explore options and saying, well, wouldn't I only come to you if things were really bad? I mean, and
Exactly.
And that may be something that people thought about private equity. And there are some private equity firms that are rescue firms. They exist to, buy low, sell high, but literally, you know what I mean? Whereas we've established some funds that are focused on healthy, growing companies, and we want to help increase the momentum at those businesses, with some. But it's exactly right. It's not, hey, I'm headed for some rough seas ahead. It's things are going incredibly well, but I also have a vision that things could be even better, and I'm willing to sort of harness some outside parties to help achieve them.
So the family that you work with here in Ohio that was 30 million to $1 billion.
Yeah.
What did they identify that said to them, now's the right time to take chips off the table? And sometimes it's not because I want liquidity. It's how do we get to the next level? It could be, different things. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on that.
You want me to answer that
Yeah,
first?
yeah, run with
so
it.
the founder of the company was age 60s and was looking for funding retirement. I mean, had put the whole family's, future was really resting in the development of this company that was started in their home, and had happened to have a daughter, second generation, mid-30s or so age-wise, as president of the company, but was kind of, okay, do you just give the company to the next generation? That doesn't generate wealth. That is, something that can make an impact on the family or might not even be able to fund retirement. Do you, kind of keep things the way they are and just do it for another decade? You know what I mean? Well, you might be missing chances to invest in that company and double or triple it in size, because it takes some aggressive action items, to achieve that. So it was that opportunity for the change in leadership, and the motivation and purpose of that transaction was to surround the next generation with resources that would help that company be successful over the upcoming decade. And they succeeded at doing that with our help.
Oh, I was just going to say on the light bulb family, part of the reason why they took the chips off the table was the parents realized that their adult children were not going to take over the business. So there was a family dynamics issue at play, and even though they wanted it to continue within the family, things were going extremely well. They were getting good counsel, so they knew from a retirement perspective that the time was right. And so the finances and the family dynamics lined up so that it was time for them to sell.
Dan, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think one of the keys to this whole decision process is communication. And I've seen examples where the founder of the company, the father, doesn't talk to the second generation. Second generation may be running the business, but he has no idea what his equity stake in is. He has no idea what happens if something happens to his father. Do I get most of the business? Does my mother get it? Does my sister get it? Not communicating what's going to happen down the road. So there's a great book. It's called Every Family Business, and it describes these two scenarios. One scenario where the family does not communicate what happens, and the father sells the business without telling the son. The son's very resentful. Now there's contention in the family. The father doesn't get the earn-out because if the son doesn't care about his father right now. Versus the other family that every year they sat down and answered 10 or 12 questions about where we want to take this business. And questions like, do I still have a passion for what I'm doing? Do I want to continue this? Do I want to do something different? Do we want to grow the business? Do we want to scale back? Whatever it is, you get together once a year and you ask these really tough 10 or 12 questions with the family, the stakeholders, and decide what you want to do. And it's a very personal decision on whether to continue with the business, pass it along, or sell it.
Highly recommend that book. Tom Deans was the author. We actually had him come and speak at one of our speaker series. And it's the kind of book, if you have a 3-hour plane flight, that's what you read on the plane. It's just a great book. I wanted to first of all, before we keep chatting up here, thoughts, questions from the audience. Anybody have anything they want to explore on a topic?
You mentioned your comment when the company hired the COO, really energized thing. Was he made a shareholder? Or he or she? Excuse me.
Not yet.
So what drives him?
What drives the COO?
Yeah. Not a shareholder.
He's not a shareholder.
But, if you're a shareholder, say, we like 10, 15 shareholders.
Yeah. The owner at this point, does not have any interest in giving equity to this person. He's too new, probably, to give him equity. He might turn out maybe to get some. He'll do well when the business sells. He'll take good care of him financially, but probably not an equity stake at this point.
And that is so common in non-private equity-backed businesses. We're going to have stock options in a way because we're preparing a pathway for a 5 to 7 year period in time. We do have to exit our companies after about 5 to 7 years, just because that's the model in which our investors are expecting their returns. We don't take money quarterly out of the business. It's hey, run the business, let's achieve enterprise value growth, and then a lot of those people who came into the company as new management team members receive their payout in the form of incentive equity at the end of that 5 to 7 year period. It's really hard to just dole out equity without that time frame, and then it forces the owner to start talking about when he or she will sell the company, and they don't want to do that, if the family isn't even up to date. But what we've seen some workarounds on that, like I've visited some companies where there are really key members of the management team, and we asked, do they have equity today? And we're told something like, well, they don't have equity, but they're in a very special profit sharing plan. They feel like shareholders, like this person gets paid, $800,000 a year or more, whereas maybe comp for that position would be $250 or $300. So they're able to generate some wealth without being a shareholder in such a way that it motivates them to achieve outsized performance.
Sean, you had a question.
A question for Dan. On the onset, Dan, you talked about 88% of ultra and high net worth individuals are business owners. Likely, the remaining 12%, there's probably a high percentage of investors that make up that group. Knowing that the business owner skill set and the investor skill set are likely different, as people graduate from Vistage to Tiger 21, what are some of the blind spots they may have shifting gears from that one skill set to the investor skill set?
So Sean's question was, and let me see if I'll repeat it back, make sure I got it right. I think Sean's question was, as individuals graduate from being business owners, having liquidity events maybe, to becoming investors, what blind spots do they see? Or what blind spots do they not see? Thank you. Thank you, Ann.
Just
They wouldn't be blind spots.
by definition, they're blind spots. They don't see them. And I often say that Vistage and Tiger 21 are function as search and rescue. We help find those blind spots, and then not only do we help find them, then we help you deal with them. So it's a really good question, and there's so many. So you would think that wealth, once you reach that pinnacle of wealth, you're on easy street. Definitely not the case. So a Tiger does focus, not entirely, but a lot on first generation wealth. So when there's a big liquidity event, all of a sudden you have this ACH transfer into your bank account, and oh my God, what do I do with this money? How do I invest it? Where do I put it? How do I diversify it? How do I make sure my children don't feel entitled? A lot of family issues. We talk about family business, but I grew up middle class. I grew up with a hardworking ethic and attitude. How do I make sure my children stay that way? I don't want them to think that everyone has a private plane. And who are these people on my plane if they fly commercial? That's not how we want to bring them up. It's those are the kinds of issues. Investing, how do I give it away? How do I build a legacy that's lasting and worthwhile? What's my 2.0? Okay, I spent a lot of time working on this wealth, building this business. I achieved this pinnacle of success. Now, what's my 2.0? I want to stay relevant. I want to do something worthwhile. So those challenges come up all the time.
I know in this room we have a number of owners that have had liquidity events, and I can speak for all of them. Just reiterating your point, it doesn't get easier, it's different, but it is uncharted territory that there's no manual that they give you when you sell your business to say, oh, these are the challenges that you're going to have. And a lot of those are definitely family, and those are the murkiest, grayish issues that are just hard to challenge and solve sometimes.
And I will say one of the benefits of a group like Tiger 21 is that sometimes these conversations are tough. You may not be able to have them with your friends. Sometimes you can't have them with your family even. So when you're in a room full of peers, you feel very comfortable, and by the way, it's totally confidential. Nothing leaves the room. You feel very comfortable talking about these issues where you sound like an idiot to talk to your friends about.
It's hard to go to your friend and say, how much money do you give your kids every year? Right. Question right there, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Danielle Locke. I'm a philanthropic advisor and a nonprofit consultant. I do fundraising coaching, and the question I have for you is, what are you seeing that liquidity event, right? In a lot of the high net worth donors that I work with, they have liquidity events. The CPA and the attorney sets up the private foundation, and then it kind of sits. And there hasn't been a next step of like, what is your philanthropic goal? What are your giving guidelines? What are the things that you want to see happen? What is the process for that? Are you seeing something different in that, or is that kind of part of what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I say it's never too early to plan, but sometimes it can be too late. And what I mean by that, especially for the business owner, is if you're thinking about selling your business, there are some things that you can do with respect to charitable planning that you have to do before you sell the business if you want to optimize the tax benefits, for example. So number one, plan early and plan often. But I think, and Dan touched on this concept of communication. So one of the things that we engage clients with is this very simple idea. It's called a family meeting, and we're intentional about it. And so we talk with families about what's on the agenda. And I can just share with you all, when it comes to business owners and high net worth individuals and families, charitable giving, like 99% of the time, is one of the topics. But what you don't want to do is commingle direction of the business with what's our charitable goal for the family, what's our legacy. So just being intentional about having those family meetings. So those are just a few thoughts.
When you say charitable goals for the family, is that outside the family? For instance, like if you want to set something up for the kids, grandkids.
Okay, so the question was, are charitable goals outside the family? So I think part of that is sometimes we think charity begins at home. So we want to give to our family, certainly. But the context that I'm expanding that to is, what are the causes and what are the things that you as a person or individual want to support? And look, there's only a few areas where you're going to transfer money. You know, it's going to be family, friends. The government, in a way, is a charity, if you think about it that way. And then there are the causes that you want to support, right? So if you directly align with, how the government is like using funds, that's great. If you say, you know what, I would like to support other things in addition or beyond that, so that's where the charitable goals come in. That gives you the opportunity as an individual to support those things that you want and direct your resources there.
Ron.
Andrew, you mentioned a couple of times you work with a lot of business owners or people who have recently sold businesses. I know I've heard what some of you people will do from your firm with those individuals, but you specifically, I'm sure some of you had people show up at your doorstep that have recently sold a business, their world is changing, and now have the primary focus is investments. What are some things you're doing with those type of families and introductions you're making?
So when someone has a liquidity event, how are we managing that money?
And what other introductions are you making sure happen, within Fairport or outside Fairport?
So one of the things we'll talk about here in a minute is, one, it takes a village. And I think we touched on this earlier. For these types of families, the dynamics and complexity are broad. And to think that myself or any one other individual has all the knowledge and wears all the right hats to be able to address all these issues in an appropriate way is never going to happen. So it takes a team to make it work. What I find interesting is oftentimes business owners, when they have these liquidity events, it's so life-changing, they almost feel paralyzed. Like, how do I move forward? What do I do? They still think, am I going to have enough? Do I have enough still? And, we'll be looking at each other and you're like, they've got so much, they don't even have to think twice about it. And so we help people. I think one of the challenges as your wealth grows, people yearn for simplicity. And as your wealth gets bigger, it gets more complex. That's a big dynamic and challenge. So how do you simplify things? So I think of a number of conversations we have with families where we say, let's think about what's your nest egg money. Let's lock that down so you know, regardless of what happens, your lifestyle expenses are going to be funded for the rest of your life. You can do whatever you want. The guardrails are going to be wide. There's going to be a huge buffer. What does that bucket of money look like? How is that managed? And that should be managed probably differently than, let's say, another bucket, which would be the legacy bucket. What's the multi-generational wealth bucket look like? So from a time horizon standpoint, that's where you start to say, and this is a big differentiator. I assume you guys see this too. Wealthy families' mindset starts to shift when they have a level of wealth where they think multi-generationally. They're not thinking, do I have enough money over my lifetime? They're starting to think, how is this going to impact my kids and my grandkids? So that other legacy bucket is very long-term time horizon money, and that's managed differently. And then there's a charity philanthropic bucket of money that's managed maybe differently. But that bucket strategy is a great way, we think, to help create simplicity out of complexity after business owners have liquidity events. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that thought, but.
No, I was just going to say, when I think about asset allocation, if you're putting everything into your business, that's sort of concentrating your wealth in a single place. And so when you're trying to balance your personal wealth, a W-2 employee is going to invest differently than a business owner, right? And so I know you know that, Andrew. So I think investing in lower risk investments when it comes to your personal wealth, because you've got everything concentrated in your business. So thinking all those things through.
And as business owners, I'm going to make a statement, and this might resonate with you. The greatest way to create a lot of wealth is by having your wealth concentrated. The easiest way to lose a lot of wealth is to have your wealth concentrated. So, food for thought. We could sit up here and talk all day.
Over there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Anne Marie.
For Dan and Cheryl, I'm wondering if you could share one most important bit of advice for a first-time CEO in your experience.
I'd say be open and interested in outside experts' advice, and it's probably something people would learn in a Vistage group and probably from another advisor as well. So, just by way of example, we were once investing in a company owned by a family, and we knew they needed to make some changes on their management team, and that CEO kind of getting the right people in the right seats. This was before transaction. We were going to approach them to say, hey, we're going to need to make this change. It's a critical discipline, and the brother-in-law literally of the family is just not the right person to lead it. And their reaction to us was, we're so glad you said that. We'd like you to do that. So that president and CEO had that mindset that, okay, I'm going to listen to this outside force because I trust them and we all want to get to the same place. If their reaction had been, no, sorry, we don't want to work with you, we want to keep things exactly the same way, we might not have ever done the deal, and they might not have a foundation today. So.
Or $1 billion. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, to follow along with that, having that growth mindset, being self-aware of what your strengths are and your weaknesses. So a CEO typically isn't good at everything. What are you really good at and what are you not so good at, so you can get help from others on the areas that you're not so good at. Being aware of that, being, I guess, self-deprecating enough to know you can't do everything, that you need support, is I think really critical. And it comes down to getting the right people in the right seats, so you have the support to do the things that you should be doing. But I think the world shifted. In 7 to 10 years ago, CEO's focus was on top line. It was always about sales. How do we generate more top line and grow the business? And we've all seen this shift with demographics, and after COVID, it was now shifted towards employees. How do I keep my employees? I don't want to lose anyone, so attrition. It's costly, and if I lose someone, I can't find someone to replace them. So the shift has really gone towards employees. Now I think it's coming back a little bit. I'm already seeing it, but so what does that mean? That means that CEOs now have to be aware of culture. Well, they didn't care about culture before; it wasn't important. And culture is not, hey, let's go to the Guardians game tonight and sit in the loge. And I have great culture because I got my team together sitting in a loge. That's not culture. Or having a plaque on the wall that says we have great values and we have integrity. That's not culture. Culture is much bigger than that. And building that culture in the organization keeps your people. And your people recognize that. And it's so important for your people to know that you see them, that you recognize them and you're interested in them. That's a big shift that if CEOs haven't gotten that, you're missing the boat. So HR has become I always tell my members, HR has become much more important in your organization, and so is your chief technology officer because of AI, and you better be aware and be thinking ahead of those things right now.
So this kind of lays the groundwork for our next question. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. The rate and pace of change keeps accelerating. And so most business owners, we live in a world of here where you're just focusing on, oh, what's this customer issue this week? Oh, this supply chain issue come up. You're putting out the fires that are right in front of you. And the great businesses, the great families, how you hit home runs on all fronts, so to speak, is take it from here out to here, which is very hard. So as change happens faster, I'd love to hear all three of your thoughts in terms of what do you see in the next 12 to 18 months that needs to be on business owners, whether it's their business, leadership, personal wealth, what needs to be on their horizon, because there's a lot of things happening.
I'd say it's different in every industry. We're very industry specialized at Riverside and find that the to-dos, the worry cards are going to be very different if you're a software and IT company versus if you're a distribution company sourcing from overseas. So I think the most important thing is have an outside board. I think in the form of Vistage, those are advisory boards. There's lots of different ways to bring an outside perspective, but in our world, we have a outside board of directors composed of at least 6 people. There are 2 people within Riverside, 2 people on the management team, and 2 entirely outside people, hopefully people with some national stature in their industries, to always focus on getting outside of the weeds and getting into the big picture of, okay, 1, 2, and 3 years ahead, are we facing any obstacles to achieving this plan? If so, what are they and how do we address them?
What do you see happening in the deal M&A world in the next 12, 18 months?
2025 is going to be very, very busy because 2024 and 2023 have been composed of some holding back, you know what I mean? Some lack of digestion, I'm not sure. There's just been a lot of sort of holding back, and we're hearing about literally floodgates, sort of opening in 2025. What that means, however, is that if you're one of those people preparing your business to market, right now there's a little bit of scarcity of high quality businesses, and that's benefiting some of those sellers. Whereas in 2025, by second quarter, there may be so many choices that it may limit the interest in some very good opportunities because suddenly there's a buffet, whereas there used to be only one entree available.
Dan, go ahead.
So I'm curious in here, how many, I hate to even bring this up, but how many people are doing something with AI in their business? Maybe half. So you asked me what's going on in the next 18, 24 months, and just from a very, very high level, if you're not thinking about AI, you need to be. As a CEO, as a leader of your organization, I'm from a very high level. Again, AI is going to become as ubiquitous as the internet, as your phone that you've got by your side. Everyone is going to be doing it, and it's going to fundamentally change the way business is done in terms of, let's just talk SEO. People are not going to be doing Google searches. They're going to be doing OpenAI searches, not just ChatGPT, but Perplexity and all the other businesses out there that are rocking the world with AI. So here's my advice. First of all, you have to have an AI policy in your organization. And the best way to get started with that is to go to ChatGPT and say, please help me write an AI policy. It will give you great tips. It'll write it for you. You can have it, say, here's my website. It'll search your website. It'll learn more about you. It'll write your policy for you. You can't take it verbatim. You always have to look at it because it's not always right. And the other thing is you should go to all of your department heads, your leaders of HR, of sourcing, of operations, sales, finance, everyone. Go to all of your leaders and say, I want you to look at how AI can make you more productive and come back to me and tell me what you found. Put the burden on them. I'm not suggesting that you're going to be able to cut staff. That's not my message here, you're going to cut heads. It's making your team more productive, and they need to get on a bandwagon now versus waiting.
Awesome advice, and I think we're just barely scratching the surface on what that can do and so on. David, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you see? I know there's a lot of big changes and blind spots on the personal financial front.
Yeah.
What's happening in the next 12, 18 months?
Well, a lot of big changes, but I'm going to focus on everyone's favorite subject, taxes and wealth transfer taxes. I know you woke up this morning thinking about that. So one of the things that's on the horizon is this thing called the sunsetting of the federal estate tax exemption. What that means is right now, the federal government gives each of you an exemption up to $13.6 million where you can transfer assets to anyone you want, and the federal government will not take a 40% bite at that apple. And so if you're a married couple, that doubles to over 27 million. So that's the world we live in today, okay? That law is set to sunset at the end of 2025. And that exemption is going to be cut literally in half. So think about the implications, just the tick of the clock going from 2025 to 2026. If your exemption drops from, let's call it 14 million to 7 million, you now have an estate tax liability, if you're in that range, that exceeds $2 million, about $2.5 million. And if you're a married couple where you had a zero estate tax liability on one day, the next day you have over a $5 million liability should you pass away. I mean, let that sink in, right? Zero one day, multi-millions of dollars the next day. So my encouragement is ask yourself, when was the last time you reviewed your estate plan, and is it prepared for this sunsetting of the exemption? And if you haven't reviewed it, or if you don't know the answer to is your plan ready to go, I would encourage you to reach out to your advisor and talk about it. So I think that sunsetting the exemption is a big one.
Ike, go ahead.
Andrew, our company does a lot of business in Europe. In Europe, we find a lot of our customers in 5th, 6th, 7th generation. They're 150-year-old companies. In America, we have Inc. magazine, we have Fast magazine, we have Wire. It's all about the founder, gets an idea, 2, 3 people, next thing you know, they got a $1 billion business. Hurry up, let's sell it. Take it to private equity, take it to the market, whatever. In Europe, we stretch it out, multi-generation. What do you think the mindset is in America that is one and done, let's get out, versus the Europeans, and also, frankly, our Asian customers, some of which are, you know.
Do you want me to take a swing at this first, or?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Companies in the world are still privately held.
So it's interesting, in Japan, which tends to be a very patriarchal society, if you're a young man who marries into a family business and you want to be a part of that family business, that young man will often change his last name to adopt the family business owner's name, and he becomes a son in that family business. And so for 7, 8, 9 generations, things like that will happen in Japan, and it's very interesting. I think my knee-jerk, answer to your question is, I think different cultures where do they put their emphasis or priority? I think in Asian cultures and European cultures where there are hundreds and hundreds of years of economic history that you can fall back on, that is the history and longevity is where the priority is placed on. I think here in the United States, we place a priority on innovation, on return on capital, which it's not a good or a bad thing. I don't think, family businesses, if Tom Deans were sitting at this table, he would say, your business is an investment. You shouldn't be married to it. It shouldn't last generations. The wealth hopefully will, and how are you looking at it? The wealth can evolve from a lumber business. Actually, we had a woman in here once whose family owned a lot of lumber, we'll just say that. And so they had transitioned from the lumber business to the paper business to the real estate development business through the 5 generations of their family, and actually the train and transportation business. So it's, I think, just where societies put their priorities.
I also want to add, our transfer tax system discourages multi-generational planning, right? You have an estate tax. There's another tax called the generation skipping tax that's in addition to the estate tax. So we just have a transfer tax system that doesn't encourage it. And then from a state legal perspective, not every state has laws that permit perpetual type of planning. And I'll give an example. When you create a trust, it can exist for your lifetime. Well, there are jurisdictions like the state of Delaware and others that say, well, you know what, let's try to encourage multi-generational planning. And so they've got things called dynastic planning. And so they allow for structures to be created in perpetuity. So we've got some of those dynamics in addition to some of those cultural aspects that Andrew just mentioned.
And maybe one other cultural aspect, Riverside does have a fund in Europe, and I actually lived and worked for 6 weeks in Brussels and kind of experienced what it was like to be there and meet some families and some coworkers and met their children. And what I heard is that in general, it's harder to change careers. It's harder to kind of change your track. Even starting, I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but even in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you know what I mean? Like if your family's in the trades, you're probably going to be in the trades. If, you don't have a lot of flexibility, so maybe that is the only option in a way, or it's just more culturally ingrained in the environment that, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Whereas there's more choices in North America. But I did speak once to a business owner about the potential to invest in their company, and the reaction was, I want whoever buys this company from me, because the founder needed to exit, I want that party to own this company for 30 years. I don't want this company to be sold in 5 years or 7 years to someone else. And I said, well, then we're not able to help you. You know what I mean? We can, you need to find a family office, a long-term fund, some individuals who have those goals, to be your buyers. So it isn't necessarily the right answer for everyone, but I do think that it can lead to generational wealth. And also, we are generating a lot of revenue for the good old IRS. I mean, every time a business changes hands, there's an incredible amount of taxes legally being paid. We are absolutely to the letter, in those corporation structures. And you look at someone like Berkshire Hathaway; they're not generating that much. They're owning those companies forever, and they're not generating those taxable events. So we're doing some good, even if it's not the same family owning the company for 5 generations.
So it's 10 o'clock, and we were going to wind down at 10 o'clock. We had a couple more questions that we could keep on going through. If anybody wants to stay, if you have to leave, by all means, feel free. I know you have time schedules and probably meetings to attend, so if you have to get up and leave, I will just call you out quietly and make you wave at everybody. But the other kind of question I wanted to make sure we spent some time drilling down on that I think is really important, because a lot of what we spoke about is people. So whether it's on your personal team, your advisory board team, your management team, how do you leverage your team? How do you know if you have the right people in the right seats? What does that look like? You first.
We're going to spend a lot of time when we look at a new investment before we close the investment saying, who is the management team today, and do we need to make changes? And it's going to be core competencies, spending days and days in person with people in our team, and just kind of making sure that people have the long-term interest and vision and passion for their role. And probably looking at a CEO, taking some tests that we've used for years and years and years, and kind of ranking people on core competencies, not to kick someone out of the seat, but to say, okay, where are the blind spots? So how can we surround, if this person's really visionary strategically, we need someone else focused on some operational tactics, or if this person's really focused on sales, we need someone else focused on strategy and new product development. So filling the table with all the different competencies.
The one company, not to keep on going back to the same example, but where you had said the one person who was part of, I think, the executive or leadership team really wasn't a good fit.
Right.
what was it about that kind of raised a flag that said they're not a good fit, not the right person in the right seat?
Didn't have the depth of experience to take a company through a transformational change. Enough knowledge and experience in utilizing IT to, this is a company that needed to move very rapidly into tech-enabled service deliverables for their customers, and just didn't have the experience or any track record doing that.
Dan, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll answer directly and indirectly. How's that?
Perfect.
CEOs are typically quick to hire and slow to fire. They end up tolerating bad performance, especially those toxic superstars. You know who they are in your organization, right? CEOs need to be confrontational, which means they need to give candid feedback, take action when necessary, be assertive when necessary. Really critical in finding the right people for the right roles. But in general, indirectly, a lot of times I'll ask my members, when you think about your workforce, how many fit into the category of participants and how many are contributors? Participants in your organization are those that come in at 8 o'clock, at 4:59, they're leaving to head out to their car. They don't add any value. They do their job, but that's it. The contributors are the ones that stay late. They're always thinking, what can I do to improve this company? Continuous improvement, make it better, be innovative. I care about this place. You better identify those and try to find more of those. Try to develop more of those contributors in your organization to help you, get to that success that you're looking for.
David, on the personal wealth side, I think that's an area that's a blind spot for often people where they kind of silo the advisors they work with. What does it look like when you make all of your advisors collaborate and work together? And how do you do that?
Wow, I mean, it looks great. It's interesting, the research shows that most families, especially as complexity increases, they have multiple advisors. And so the challenge is they receive fragmented advice. And so what we encourage is make sure that the team that you have in place, you've got an advisor that works with families that are like you, right? That has the experience, but that also has the connections to the legal community, the tax community, to bring in advisors. Like the accountant that worked really well when you started the business may not be the same accountant that can advise you as the business grows exponentially. So just building that team over time, having that honest assessment, and then, like everything else, reevaluate and then make some potentially tough decisions. But when it works, at least the families that we work with, they express a lot of satisfaction because those conflicts, that frustration that they feel, it starts to dissipate.
Awesome, thank you. Thoughts, questions, anything on anybody's mind out there? Dana.
So what if you have a good company, but you want to get to that next level, but you're not eligible, I guess, for private equity, but you need that kind of guidance in your company. These guys are getting bombarded every day with like salt and so what's your recommendation? Who do they turn to grow and to get to that next level and make hard changes in their company?
I'd encourage Vistage. I mean, honestly, an EOS that, so we've seen so many times that business owners and who are management team leaders who are active in Vistage before, that helps prepare them on that pathway.
Yeah, there's what Vistage, I'll tell you what Vistage doesn't do. We are not wealth advisors, nor does Tiger 21. We're not wealth advisors. We don't replace the Fairports of the world or the other wealth advisors and the investment bankers. We are not that. What we are is a personal board of directors for members. So when they're dealing with issues like how do I scale for growth, how do I raise capital, how do I deal with an underperforming leader in my organization, it's to have, as a leader, you're faced with all these important decisions all the time. Some are easy decisions, some are very complex. But to have a group of high-performing CEOs sitting in a room with you who have no bias, they have no agenda, they're not trying to make money off of you, all they want is for you to be successful, you get incredible advice from that group on how to move forward in a variety of different topics, challenges, opportunities. It's incredible what you get.
I'm just curious, raise your hand if you're an owner in this room and someone holds you accountable. Besides Ann. I think that's I think that's a lot of challenge, because when you sit at the top, you look down and hold everyone else accountable. But if you don't have an advisory board or a Vistage group, somebody that can sit there and say, hey, you've had this people issue for a while. We keep talking about it every time we have an advisory board meeting. Do you want to solve this issue or not? And I think that's a challenge that can be solved with a Vistage group or an advisory board and whatnot, or people who will not be yes people and tell you the hard truth. And when you're an owner, that's one of the hardest things to get, is objective, unbiased perspective.
So if I can just elaborate on that a little bit. When we do what's called issue processing at every meeting, it's very important. We talk about what's most important to you. And we go through a model of getting from what's the issue down to what are the solutions. But when you come up, the solutions are action items. They're not just wishes, they're actually action items. We document those items, we memorialize them, and we ask you, when are you gonna complete those action items? Give me the date, time when you're gonna get them done, and we follow up at the next meeting to make sure you did it. So there's sort of peer pressure to make sure that there's accountability. Accountability is a big piece of the Vistage meeting. We make sure that you do what you say you're gonna do. And if you don't do it, we wanna know why and what's your new promise.
So I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I want to put the three of you on the spot also. So out of everything that we've talked about today, what's the one thing, Cheryl, that you say, this I think is an important takeaway, I want everyone to remember this?
Seek outside resources when you're at an inflection point, whether they're from your wealth advisor, a Vistage team, an outside source of capital, and set your goals big.
David.
I'm just going to piggyback off of that.
That's okay.
No, literally, it's be intentional and set those goals so you have a lens through which you're making decisions, and then reach out. And a tactical, practical step, get out that estate plan and just ask yourself, do you know what it says? And if you have some form of,
no.
I don't know what that is, or reach out to your advisor.
Dan.
For the business CEOs, leaders, founders, find time to be more strategic and not just tactical. And be self-aware of where your strengths are and where you need help. And go get that help.
Questions, thoughts before we wind this up? Okay, thanks everybody for coming. We'll stick around up here if anybody wants to chat.